to be here and to have the time now. So now I can be there.
That's great. So we are recording, right, Greg?
We are live, so take it away, Alex.
Perfect. And we're also recording, right? Oh no, it's
Yeah.
it's automatic. Yeah, perfect.
Automatic, yeah.
So, welcome everyone. Good morning, good day, or good evening, depending on where you are. Thank you for logging in at different hours from all over the planet for these new sessions of the seminar Being Singular. And we are on a French post-structuralist streak right now, after quite a few more systematic and metaphysical talks. Right now, we are going deeper into the rabbit hole of contemporary French thought, but we are doing this with a twist today, with a good friend and great scholar, Francesco Di Maio, who got his PhD at the University of Bologna and at the École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales in Paris, and is an expert of French contemporary thought, so Deleuze, Simondon, but basically he wrote his PhD dissertation, is that right, Francesco? Not really, no, but you wrote a monograph, you wrote a book actually on the problem of individuation in Duns Scotus, and today he will give us a talk with a title that is quite difficult to pronounce actually, because I don't know whether to call it ecceité, ecceité, ecceité. He will tell us. So it's basically, he will give us a talk about a very pivotal topic for our seminar, which is Gilles Deleuze's interpretation of John Duns Scotus. Francesco, thank you so much for being here, and thank you all for being here and being part of the seminar. You have the floor.
Thanks, Alessandro. Thanks everyone to be here. I'd like to start. Thanks the organizer of this seminar, Alessandro and Gregory, for the invitation. Well, I'm also glad to ask them for this very difficult task. So to explain the problem of singularity in the reading of Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari of John Duns Scotus, or John Duns Scotus, or Johannes Duns Scotus. Well, it's quite complicated from one side, but from the other, it's easier because the interpretation is already given in this seminar in the two last section, one of Emmanuel Aloa, who speaks about Simondon and Deleuze, and some elements were introduced by Saloni de Souza in the analysis of the problem of ones, plural, in Plato's Parmenides. So why it's very interesting to talk about Gilles Deleuze in a seminar about the problem of singularity. Gilles Deleuze died in 1995, and after his death, in the United States were translated Différence et Répétition, Différence et Répétition, that is his theoretical masterpiece. It was written in 1968, and just in that book, Deleuze wrote some pages about Jean Duns Scotus. Some elements are in the text of the same here on the problem of expression in Spinoza. So everything I will say is about that books. But the problem is that after 1995, the interpretation of Deleuze take very different path. Someone thinks that Deleuze is a monist, otherwise is an individualist, or a third interpretation. The point is that every time that's my opinion, that's my interpretation, the task of Deleuze is to think a philosophy of multiplicity. So how to think the links between the one reality of multiple things in which there is no a transcendent value. There is not an ontological dogmatism, so to say. There is not an element that starts from ex nihilo, out of nothing, just to determine the value of things. Everything that is in the world is given by composition of elements. So the point is not to find the foundation of a ontology metaphysical ontology, but to think and ethics. I have a problem with this word in English because the term ethics can be translated, for example, in Italian as morale. That is the practical traduction of the translation of the problem of transcendence. The concept every time today I will talk about ethics. I mean, the meaning is one of ethica in Spinoza. So the problem is not the good or the bad, but is the effect of compositions. So that's the task of all the philosophical way of Deleuze. So another 2 points to explain the problems with interpretation. One is linked with Hegel and the other is with monism. We was just joking with Greg and Alex just before the start of this section. Deleuze, every word that Deleuze dedicated to Hegel was critical. But every time he talks about Hegel, he's not speaking about Hegel itself, but about the French reading of Hegel in the 19th century philosophy. So his polemical targets are Jean Hippolyte, who translated the Phänomenologie des Geistes, and he wrote a commentary of Science of Wissenschaft der Logik, Science Logic, Logique et Existence, Logic et Existence, and maybe indirectly Alexandre Kojève that wrote the famous introduction of reading of Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit. And I think that nowadays we can go beyond this kind of joke and dialectics and play against Hegelians versus Deleuzian and so on. If you want to talk from a theoretical point of view, we cannot consider these two sides. Vice versa, if you want to talk about the relation of Deleuze on Hegel, we can just utilizing a historical historical point of view. So meta-historical, the history of historiography. Second point, why some critics start to think about Deleuze as a philosophy of one. I think there are two historical reasons. I just say that Deleuze died in 1995. Paul Patton translated Difference Repetition. The first seminar in the United States started to talk about Deleuze from a metaphysical and theoretical point of view. But in the same year, during the tributes and necrologies and so on, it was written a very short book on Deleuze about Alain Badiou. And the title of this book is a quotation by Deleuze. The title is Deleuze. The subtitle is La clameur de l'être, the clamor of being. That is a quotation from Difference and Repetition. And it's just in the part in which Deleuze talks about Jean d'un Scotus. And Badiou said, well, if you read Deleuze, every time he say something, he goes against the one or against the individualism. But the question is that in the deep, Deleuze is a thinker of the one, a strange kind of one that is the one all, or the one whole. So the Deleuzian scholars wrote a lot against Badiou, a lot of reading takes Badiou indirectly, and I'm sure that we, especially for this reason, we cannot talk about Deleuze as a philosopher one. There is another reading that tried to think Deleuze as a philosopher one that starts from psychoanalysis. In 1972, Deleuze wrote the first volume of Capitalism and Schizophrenia. It's called L'Anti-Oedipe, the Anti-Oedipus, with Félix Guattari. It is a book against psychoanalysis, especially the Lacanian psychoanalysis, but not directly against Jacques Lacan. Jacques Alain Miller wrote some commentary about Lacan and said that the seminar 24 that dedicated to James Joyce is the constructive part of the first book of Capitalism and Schizophrenia. So Lacan and Deleuze say the same thing. What's the link between Deleuze and Lacan? Is this concept of Lacan, who's called Il y a de l'un. There is the one, written all together. And Lacan takes everything, takes this element from a reading of Parmenides, of Plato's Parmenides. I don't want to talk this. I know that a lot of reader use, especially in Italy, uses this link to think Lacan and Deleuze together. But this is the historical and polemical reason why I have to say that Deleuze cannot think the monism, is not monist. It's also a suggestion for the organizer of this seminar to consider the possibility to invite some Lacanian to think about, to say something about the probable singularity in this concept of il y a de l'un in Lacan. So let's get to the point. Deleuze reading of Jean-Duns Scotus. Deleuze have never read Duns Scotus in his life, but he wrote a lot about him because he utilizes some manuals, in particular 2 books. One is Jean-Duns Scotus by Etienne Gilson, a great Middle-age historian. It's a very strange book because it's the first main book about Jean-Duns Scotus. It was published at the beginning of 50s. And Etienne Gilson is a Thomist. So the idea is to build his enemy, to think Duns Scotus is the great enemy of the Thomism as the internal enemy of the Christianism in general. So the idea of Thomas is Etienne Gilson is to consider Jean-Duns Scotus as internal antithesis of Christianism, in which the thesis and the synthesis is Thomas itself. So this is the reason why every time we talk about Duns Scotus, every time we read about Jean-Duns Scotus, we see this category, Jean-Duns Scotus against Thomas, the doctrine of universality of being against the analogy doctrine of being. From a historical point of view, is false for 2 reasons. Firstly, at the beginning of his life, Jean-Duns Scotus uses the doctrine of analogy of being. Just in the second part of his life, uses the universality doctrine. The second point is that Jean-Duns Scotus hasn't talked so much about Tommaso d'Aquino. So this conflict is just something that happens in the last century. Deleuze take this book of Etienne Gilson and think universality of being against analogy of being. The second source of Deleuze is one of the main philosophical master in the last century in France, that is Maurice de Gandillac. Maurice de Gandillac, who translated Hegel, he translated in French the Encyclopedia of Philosophical Sciences, attended a project about the history of the church, and he wrote the chapter of 13th century. So he wrote something. So a chapter is dedicated to Jean-Duns Scotus. The point is that this chapter is not focused on Jean-Duns Scotus, but on some element of the Scotism. For example, the problem of distinctio formalis that we'll talk just after. So these are the polemical elements to understand this reading of Deleuze on Jean-Duns Scotus and to understand why Deleuze says something in their tears. Well, I will talk about 3 elements that are the 3 elements that Deleuze takes from Scotus. So there are the 3 elements, the most important elements about the problem of singularity: universality of being, distinctio formalis, and individuation. The doctrine of universality of being is the doctrine by which everything that is. That's it. You can say this in other term, the being is everything that is, everything is, and it is in a universal way that is say that there is no difference in the way the being is. So there is no ontological ontologische Differenz between Sein and Seiendes from being what is, I don't know the English translation of Heidegger, but there is no ontological distinction, which is the traditional point by which Deleuze takes this element, and is from the reading of Plato's Parmenides. That's why I have to recall the Saloni de Sousa session. We talk about the point that there are a lot of ones at plural in the dialogue by Plato. I don't want to deepen this point, but all the hypotheses proposed in the dialogue can be divided into two groups. One can be called ontological hypothesis, and the second one, henological hypothesis. Henological with H, we're not talking about alcoholism, we're talking about the one, henological. This category uses by Deleuze are taken by Etienne Jusson from another book who's called L'être et l'essence, the being and the essence, in which the middle-aged scholar are so try to distinguish these two traditions. The ontological say as the discourse on being, and from this theoretical position, everything that is get its value for what has in common with the principle, with the being. So is a kind of as a positivism, is a positivist position, so to say. The other, the henological, that is the discourse on the one, say that everything that is got its value for what has not in common with the principle, with the one. So every time we talk about the one, the being in Deleuze, there is a lot of confusion. But I think that we get this double path, these two categories. It can be very easy to understand what Deleuze will try to think. So Deleuze tried to read the Parmenides, the Plato's Parmenides, in a Neoplatonical way. Something that I would like to write on, but I think that Deleuze are well influenced by Jean Val. There is no one has written about this topic, so someone can steal my hypothesis of research. But why I have to say that is a Neoplatonical reading. The ontological and the henological position are translated into hypostasis in the Neoplatonical hypostasis. The first hypothesis is the one of henology, is the one that goes beyond, is the transcendent one. The second hypothesis, that is the intellect, is the ontological one. And the second hypothesis is the intellect, and the metaphor, we can say that is a metaphor, you cannot think about it, but from a rhetorical point of view, is a metaphor. The ideas and intellect can be distinguished but are the same. There is no intellect without ideas. The ideas are just into the intellect. Without ideas, we are no intellect. So this is a traditional way to think the immanence between the one and the many. Other can be das Licht, the light. Sometimes we can think about dreams, the transcendental idealism by Kant, Fichte, Schelling, and so on, uses the dreams to think about it. And I think we can work about cinema in the last 1 century and a half. But I think that the metaphorology to think these links starts from this element, light and intellect in Neoplato. So we have the conflict between a one that goes beyond and a being, the intellect of Neoplato. So Deleuze tried to think the conflict between these two elements. From one point is to think the ontological one, the intellect one by Neoplatonism, and from the other, as always, the problem of substantiation of the unity of the transcendence. The one that goes beyond, it can talk, it cannot and give value from what is. So what about Duns Scotus? The Deleuze du Scotus try to goes beyond these conflicts and try to think in the medieval age the idea that the being is univocal. So what about the problem of analogy? Why analogy, according to reading of Deleuze, that starts from Jusson, that's taken from Thomas, that arrives to Aristoteles, doesn't work. The analogy of being is a hierarchical ontology. In a way, we have the being that is that expresses itself in a different genre. These genres are divided in species, and it arrives to the individual. Aristoteles and Thomas say that we cannot think we cannot know the singularity. We cannot know the individuum is the first point, is the starting point of this seminar. But what's the problem of the hierarchical analogical being position? The problem is that we cannot say the categories are. Why? If something is a genre, cannot be a species. If something is up, you cannot down, and vice versa. The arbor porfiriana, the hierarchical analogical position, cannot allow to think a recursivity, something that goes up, okay, can go down, can goes down, and vice versa. So what's the problem? You cannot say that some categories, some genre, or some species are, because if you say that some of these are, you are predicated the being of these categories. So the being starting from the highest point of the trees goes back to the lowest. So it's something that is a contradiction in this structure. So there is only solution. The being is everything that is. So that's the idea of the univocity of being. But after we say that everything is, we have the problem of distinction. If you say that everything is being, how can we distinguish something from something else? So we move to the second point of my presentation, the second concept that's Deleuze takes from the Scotism that are the distinctions. Just to be very short on this point, this concept of distinzione formales is a concept that Deleuze takes from Claude Frassen. Claude Frassen is a Scotist that discussed Scotus in the same year as Spinoza's, in the same years. And this concept is useful just for one thing. That's why it's not so common to find it in the Scottish bibliography. It's just to distinguish the attributes of God in God itself. The distinction formalis is an intensive distinction. So what's the problem? God is infinite. Goodness in God is infinite. The justice in God is infinite, and all the positive characteristics of God are infinite. So literally an extensive distinction of these elements is not possible because all of these have the same extension, the infinite. So how can we distinguish one from the other? Well, it's very easy. It's a qualitative distinction. The goodness is goodness just because it's not the love of God. So from the extensive point of view, they are the same, but all these attributes express God in different way. So they are distinguished, but they indicate the same thing. how Deleuze can explain this element. That is, start from Scotus, but it's the same problem of the substance in Spinoza and the expression of is the problem of expression in Spinoza. Well, that's how can we, in the semiological way, he uses Frege, Gottlob Frege, and say that the substance or the being is just the Bedeutung, is the reference. All the attributes are names, are signifier in just to take Saussure, and each element express God in different ways, and the way they express God are the Sinnen, are the senses. And Deleuze uses Frege, the star of the morning, the star of night. Use Spinoza and say that you can call the patriarch with two names, as for example Jacob or Israel. So my thesis is that Deleuze tried to propose a semiological ontology. So there is just one meaning of everything, and that is the substance, and the world is just a differentiation of senses. That's why in this, that's the sense of semiological, just a discourse about the senses. And that's why Deleuze wrote this book after differential repetition, the title Logique du sens, logic of the sense. Interesting point. Just a question. Is Spinoza a monist? Well, sure, the substance, there is just one substance. Okay, that's right. That's true. You cannot say that that's wrong, this sentence. But it's not the point. It's not if you want to individuate the substance, you cannot say that substance is the one in Spinoza. If you take the propositio quinta, the fifth proposition of the Etica, just at that moment, Spinoza say there is just one substance, just because it's kata sui, is perfect, is infinite, so there are no other substances. That's why we have just only one substance. But if you want to search in Etica a definition of substance, he says that substance is perfectly infinite. So the definition substance is the perfect infinity. If it's not infinite perfection, because that is the definition of substance of God in Descartes and the first Spinoza. So in the moment you think about the totality as infinite and not for the unity, you have the problem of distinction. So Deleuze uses the distinctio formalis by taken from the Scotism for the distinction of the attributes of substance. Well, and that's the good words that Deleuze dedicated to Jean-Paul Scotus. There is the third part that is about the individuation. So the singularity, or we will see what it does mean, or the unity, so to say, of the singular thing. Sorry, this is quite complicated to present this problem. It's just for questions of rhetorical substance, just not to say suspense, not to give the solution at the beginning. Deleuze is maybe the first one to use Jean-Paul Scotus with Gilbert Simondon. Emmanuel Alloa in the last section tried to explain this question. How can I clearly summarize this element? In Jean-Paul Scotus, there is a numerical unity, una unitas numerales. What is a unitas numerales, a numeral unity? Is that characteristic that can bring you to put something in a numerical series. So if you have two cell phones on your table, you can say that you have two cell phones. So why you can say that the cell phones are two, just because they have this numerical unity to that bring you to put this element in a numerical series. Well, but we said that univocity of being is expressive. We said that it's semiological. We say that there is an enunciation. So to say that we have different senses in things, we have to give a important ontological distinction. The things doesn't exist. The thing happens. That's the obsession of Deleuze. Deleuze say that I don't believe in things. I believe in events. The thing happens. So how can you say that something can attend a numerical series? Well, they happens in a way they can attend it in the series. How can you say that the thing happens from what? And Jean-Jacques Scotus, Simondon, and Deleuze use this concept that is natura communis, the common nature by Scotus, and in Simondon is the pre-individual. So you can put the unity of something just because you have some elements that goes before the individuation. So if the thing while the thing has a numerical unity, the common nature cannot have a numerical unity. Scotus and Simondon has just a very little difference. That Scotus think about a less than numerical unity. This common nature is something that is a bit less than the unity, while Simondon think that pre-individual is something just a little more than the unity. But the point is the same. If you want to think the singularity of something, you have to think it about as something that access this singularity. So at the end of the pages in difference repetition, which Deleuze talks about, Jean-Jacques Scotus, he criticized Simondon and Scotus about this element, which are about the problem of individuation. So what's the problem of Deleuze on the Scotus and Simondon on the individuation? The point is that if you put ontological something that is before the singularity, you can reproduce the conflict between enology and ontology that we met at the beginning. And if we take the second part of the book of Simondon on the problem of individuation, l'individuation à la lumière des formes et des informations, we can, there is the risk to think an autonomy of the pre-individual and the common against the singularity. So the idea of Deleuze is to think singularity and common nature together. Just an example, in the, I know I see there is Cécile Malaspina here, so I'm afraid to say something bad or worse about Simondon, but from a historical point of view, in the first translation of the book of Simondon in Italian, was made by Paolo Virno, who translated just the second part of the book that's about the practical philosophy. And there is this risk. A book, an editorial and a bibliographical risk about it. So just move from 1968, the year of the problem of expression in Spinoza, difference and repetition, to the 1977, in which Deleuze uses this concept, this term that I'm not sure how to say it, but is ecceité en français, in French. The start from if you say HEAC, eitas, is taken from ecce, from this, in Latin. But Deleuze tried to change. He added this age. He created a difference in the Derridian way to give a different meaning of this element. Something is not ek, is not this, but this something is something that happens. Is ecce, is voici, is voila. What's the English of voila? Is the here you are. So the thing is an event. So I don't know how to the right pronunciation of ecceité. I think it's ecceité. And in this in 1977, Deleuze used Scotus and Simondon in this way to think the singular element, to something that happens from a pre-individual field that has a retroactive effects on the singularity and vice versa. The funny part is that when Deleuze says something about Scotus, is not something that takes from Scotus, but from the Scotism. So in the 1977, I want to say that I want to confess that he's not a great historian of philosophy, is not very precise. I say, okay, something that takes from Scotus, but not from Scotus. Well, if you take Jean-Etienne Jusson, he said that it's a wrong etymology, ek, from the point of view of Scotus. The things does not exist itself, but they happens. So that's why ecceité is more far from ek than from ecce. So voici ma présentation. That's the problem I'd like to put on the table. So please ask me whatever you want about this problem of university of being, the distinction formalis, and the problem of individuation of this in the schizoanalysis of Deleuze, a bit of gathering. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Francesco, so much for this very dense presentation about such a difficult issue. So I think you really shed some light, at the very least, on what the problems are, so to say, what is at stake. And I believe it's also very useful to present Gilles Deleuze's philosophy historically, because I think, I don't know whether you agree, but sometimes it is something that goes missing in the urge to present Deleuze's philosophy as something very original, groundbreaking, etc., etc. Whereas I think it's safe to state Deleuze's explicit aim was to shed light on a tradition, actually. So that I mean, there is something through the history of philosophy that allows us to think about these topics. So oneness, singularity, difference, individuation, etc., in a different way. So I guess we have time for questions, for some debate. So if anyone among those who are with us on Zoom or on YouTube have some questions, if you have them on Zoom, please make yourself visible in any way you want, even by just speaking or raise your hand.
We can't have the time now.
Sorry?
Sorry, my fault.
Oh, okay, sorry. So just, raise your hand or speak. Yeah, so Elena has a question. I will just say something about those who are watching us on YouTube. If you have questions, you can just write them in the chat, and Gregory will be so kind to read them out for you. So I believe we have two questions, one by Elena and one by Cecile. So Elena, please.
Thank you very much, Francesco, for your presentation. It was very instructive, very clear, very interesting. I only have a clarificatory question on the last point. It's possible that I misunderstood, so perhaps then you can clarify to me this point. Why is this idea of the ecceité as voilà by Deleuze, in Deleuze, expression of unity of the pre-individual and the individual phase in Simondon, or perhaps I misunderstood, but what I understood was that the voilà is the expression of the unity for Deleuze, for the non-difference between the pre-individual and the individual. Is it right? And if so, how is it? Why?
Well, thanks for the question. No, it's not why it's important that this rhetorical scamotage is very easy it's useful to think the event from a grammatical point of view. Is voilà, the ecce is a deictical, is something that changed meaning according to the geotemporality coordination of the discourse. If you say voila here is different if you say voila there, obviously. So it's a way to explicit that the thing starts, the things happens, is an enunciation. The being announce itself. The thing is something that happens. The thing is something that takes with him, with it, the pre-individual itself. Just because the voila is here and there, or in that moment, in that place. So I try to think why Deleuze is more useful to use ecce than ec. In my book, I use this chapter written by Carlo Ginzburg in Occhiacci di Legno, Bad Wooden Glasses. I don't know how to translate in English. It's about the uses of ecce in the Bible. So the ecce is the revelation, is something that happens. This element of event doesn't appear in the ec. That's the grammatical point of view. There are another reason why Deleuze and Guattari change their mind about Simondon and Scotus. It's just because they want to think about the desire. So they wrote the Anti-Oedipus. They uses the concept of desire in a way that were misunderstood. The desire, from a Spinozian point of view, is the essence of the human being, and the desire is a combination of elements, that happens. So if you say desire, you don't think the fluxus of things that's got in this engagement. So you think the desire is something missing, is lack. The desire is the desire of the other, according to Lacan. So they was looking for something that cannot be understood. I don't know that eccetas helps in this way, but in any case, doesn't there is no the risk of that misunderstanding. There is always something about psychoanalysis. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Francesco. We have Cecile and then Gregory.
Hi, very nice to meet you, and thank you very much for this lovely presentation. I only discovered recently what an awesome concept ecceité is, and I like Deleuze for switching things around, because your reading is not destiny, if you like. So you go where you need to go, not where you are told to go. What did I want to ask you? I'm sorry, I didn't want to put my camera on because I have a flu, so I have a brain fog now. I think I just forgot. I wanted to say thank you, first of all. Yes, now I remember. I came across some recent scholarship on Scotus. I don't read Latin, and I haven't really ventured into the labyrinth of Scotus's own writings. I tried, but it looks like you need to be very well equipped to do it, because in his commentary, it doesn't seem to be always obvious whether he's exponing his own point of view or somebody else's point of view in the process of a takedown. So I stayed with the secondary literature for now. And there I came across this notion that Étienne Gilson, obviously these people are not aware that Simondon exists or Deleuze, I don't think, or that would be interesting for them because they're medievalists, but they were saying that Étienne Gilson had fundamentally misunderstood and also misrepresented Scotus. Probably, as you say, when you're saying that he was a Thomist, that there was an aspect here of predetermining his reading of Scotus. And given that Simondon and Deleuze probably also didn't read Scotus directly, is that, are we potentially, do we have the legacy of Étienne Gilson, Scotus through Simondon and Deleuze? I wondered if you had something to say about this. But anyway, it's really delighted to meet you. Thank you to everyone for organizing this seminar series. I hope if the other sessions have been recorded, I would very much like to know how I can access them and listen to them.
Cecily, it's a pleasure. Thank you. And Francesco,
maybe
please.
just briefly, I'll just first say, you can watch all the recorded talks on this channel. On Thinking the Absolute is what it's called. So you just in YouTube. So.
In YouTube, okay, cool. Because I got straight into the
yeah. So it's called Thinking the Absolute.
Cool.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Awesome. Thank you.
Can I, Alessandro? Okay. So thanks, Cecile. Such a pleasure to meet you and talk with you alive, even if mediated. Well, Gilbert Simondon books about Jean-Duc Scotus is a breaking point in the reading of Jean-Duc Scotus. Well, the interest on Scotus in France starts from Martin Heidegger. Heidegger wrote his dissertation with Husserl about the Kategorie und Bedeutungslehre in Scotus, the doctrine of meaning and categories in Duns Scotus. But for years after the publication dissertation, I cannot remember the name, but the Grammatica Speculativa on which Heidegger wrote his dissertation was discovered not to be written by Scotus, but by Thomas aus Erfurt. But there is always this interest about the eccetas. Heidegger sometimes uses this concept of eccetas, and in French philosophy, sometimes there is this eccetas that happens in Rancière on cinema, on Jean-Luc Nancy, and so on. In any case, Gilbert Simondon and Deleuze haven't read Scotus directly, but for a bibliographical reason. The complete works of Scotus, they were not available at the moment. Beyond their skills in reading Latin. Simondon wrote his history on the concept of individuum, on the history of philosophy, Emile Preillet, and he just spent two pages about Scotus, but there is now something interesting on the topic. The point is that Deleuze can think this problem after 1968, not for political, maybe also for political reason, but just because there is the Spinoza Renaissance in the 60s. So in the 60s, Martial Gerould, that is a great German historian of German idealism, on Rousseau, Fichte, start reading Spinoza mot à mot, word by word. So there is a renovation of reading of Spinoza. So the problem of individuation can rethink with Simondon and with this new reading of Spinoza's. Simondon was to update or to old date. It was something was beyond his time, so that's why he couldn't read directly Scotus. Deleuze comes after this problem, after Alquier, after Alexandre Mathéron. He wrote about community individuation in Spinoza's. So all these elements arrives in the French culture. It's the same problem of Simondon on Spinoza. It doesn't read. It cannot read Spinoza with the transindividuality. We have to wait until Balibar that can read Spinoza with Simondon. It's just historical axis, and that's why I would like to be more a historian of philosophy than a theoretical philosopher. I think it can be more useful to think some problems. So that's the. Thanks.
Great, Francesco. And we have Greg now.
Yeah, thanks so much, Francesco, for the very illuminating, to use the metaphor, the old and tired metaphor, talk. I have two questions. One is just a simple clarification, and I'd just like to hear you say more about it. And then the second question is more of a systematic question that concerns univocity of being. So yeah, my first question is very simple. I'd just like to hear a little more about what is meant by common nature and pre-individual. And I would just like to hear a little more about this and what exactly it means, so that I'm not confused. I think that may also help inform my next question. So yeah, maybe you could say a little more about this. Seems very important for the discussion of the singular.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks. Just because a quite difficult question to explain this concept, not with the same vocabulary of the same author.
Yes.
So that's the point. So what's the point? From the Aristotelian point of view, from a Thomas point of view, we have, for example, the animality, that is a genus, as a genre, and we have the species, for example, rational and non-rational, with logos or without logos. Okay. And then we have the individualities. So from this point of view, that's quite logical. You can thinking with Boolean classification. So it's a way of set in set. That's why you can think this on the in the hierarchical way. The common nature and the pre-individual is something that is not determined a priori, but is something that is determined with the following step, the lower step. So if you think with the genre species categories, you have to say that the individuum is in the genre or is in the species is in the from the other point of view, I think it's more correct to say that the individual attended or participate to the common nature. So you can have with these new categories a retroactive effect between the common nature and the individuum. From the point of view of Scotus, what is the most extended common nature? Is the being. Everything is being. Is more undifferentiated category, and the individuum is vice versa, the most determined. Is number unity, is unitas numerale. But you cannot think this element one without the others. That's from the point of view of Scotus, but is the same problem, is the same position Simondon. Cécile, please confirm what I said. But I think that's the main idea. From one point is the hypostasis of the categories, gens, species, and so on. From the other is a more dynamic and osmotical categories. So that's, I think, the reason why with this category we can read again Hegel in different way. And we can find the trans-individual, that is the link between pre-individual and individuated in Simondon in Hegel itself. Just want to I don't know Hegel so much, but I think that's the hermeneutical reason why you can this interpretation can happen.
Yeah, that's already very helpful. So yeah, thank you. Good. So let me ask my question about the univocity of being. And I like the argument you presented against the analogical view. I actually don't think it makes much sense, and I'm happy to hear argument against it. Always having to fight my Catholic friends about this. But I think there's also, I can imagine, as I have this conversation I've had many times with my certain Catholic friends, they may also raise an objection of the following kind. Something that I've thought about quite a bit, which is if you take being to be univocal, you begin with the univocity of being. Someone might worry then, well, I mean, you raised the question which led to the second set of discussions about the formal distinction, which is what's the origin of difference? And how can there be difference? Because, and you differentiated between the extension and intension and sense and reference and the like, and the second part was all very clear. But someone might wonder, how is there even sense at all? How could there be any senses at all, any multiplicities at all? Especially if you say you try to find the principle of difference in being, but you can't, because being is univocal and it's always is. And so the only place, if you follow a kind of classical line of thinking, that the difference comes from the outside, it comes from something beyond the genus that's differentiated, then the only place that the difference can come from is nothing. That is to say, only non-being is the source of difference. And so that's why it seems to me that if you make being univocal, then, well, you have to say something like non-being is the principle of difference, and it's only non-being that differentiates things. Now, it's interesting, that could be taken to be paradoxical. That could be taken to be a reductio ad absurdum. Now, I don't think it's a reductio, not on my view. It would simply be a true contradiction or something like this. Now, this doesn't mean that the analogical view is any better. I mean, you have the problem that, for example, probably you need to rely on univocity at some level anyway. But even if not, Aristotle has this classical problem that, how does thinghood get divided? You have to appeal to something that's not a thing to differentiate things. So it's not as though the problem of the difference is solved in Aristotle. It's simply relocated at another level, right? You get the contradiction, but in a different way. So that's I'm interested in, does Deleuze address the question on those terms? Does Scotus address the question on those terms, this problem of, given univocity, how in principle can we explain the origin of difference? And that seems impossible, even though differences are. Are they simply, is it, for example, is the mistake that we have some implicit appeal to like principle of sufficient reason, and we think there must be a why of the difference, when in fact it simply presents itself in multitudes, and there's no why of the fact of difference or something like this? Is that the mistake? And so you can have your univocity of being, your plurality of senses, but you just, well, don't have a why for the fact of difference. So yeah, I'm just curious how Deleuze would, or Scotus, by your lights, how they might, or how they do, in fact, respond to such questions. Why are we even justified in appealing to any senses at all, much less any individual's under senses at all? Yeah, so I hope that question makes sense.
Well, maybe is the question what you put on the what you ask me. So how to say? Well, I think it's a way to rethink the metaphysical question. So why there is something and not nothing. That's the last translation of that problem. Why do we cannot think the undifferentiated, and that's it. In Italy, we had Emanuele Severino that for the entire life repeats that the distinction, the difference is just an illusion. And well, Italian problems, don't care about it. No, the point is from point of view of Scotus. I repeat, I'm not an expert of Scotus, but sorry, I don't want to lose the connection. It doesn't work. Great. The point is that even the difference is something that is. So you can say that the difference is something that happens, something that is. So the university of being is something that's predicated till the difference. So it doesn't work. Sorry, we get technical problems. I hope that is. No, it doesn't. Great. I can lost connection. Try there, please. Okay. First point, from the Deleuzian answer, I can say that is the Spinoza's answer. So you have to say that there is the distinction just because the substance is infinite, and God express itself in an infinite way. I will lose the connection. I just anticipated this problem. So that's the second element, just because of the infinite elements of the substance that express itself. So from ethical point of view, is the problem of meaning of life. So why there is something, the bad happens and so on. So I think that's also the reason why I'm not.
Oh no, we just lost.
Okay. Well, his last words were, "It's dead." So I guess
that's my worry about this infinity here. Yeah, but
in the end, not everything is eternal. I mean, it turns out
maybe we wait a minute, because maybe he'll be able to be resurrected, depending on your theology, Alex.
No, absolutely. I mean, we have to be generous on hope.
Yes.
So I will just, maybe he'll try and call me. So I will just write him.
Yeah.
I will just tell him that so we're waiting for him.
No, it's already a very good answer that the substance is infinite, so it must be infinitely expressed. And I suppose I'm obstinate, and I would still demand more, not from him per se, but from the philosophers, and to ask how does this infinite express itself infinitely? What's the logic of this? Even if it must, and therefore it does, but how? And I suppose that's also something that I'm still worried about in my own writing and thinking is how.
Yeah.
How exactly is it possible, and how it must be, but how can it be? And I suppose that's what bothers me. But it was a very good answer to a very hard problem, and there's no easy answer to that question. But yes, yeah.
So no, it's absolutely, and it's the problem we've been discussing about since the beginning of this seminar, by the way. I mean, in a way, the problem of university and plurivocity of being is really maybe the fil rouge of this seminar.
Yes.
We've been discussing this in every discussion. So Francesco just wrote to me, and he just very theologically said, "I'm coming." So we are waiting for his resurrection and second arrival, and it will be glorious, of course. But for now, yeah, this was exactly the kind of question I also wanted to ask him, because I mean, we have Gaetano Chiurazzi here, who's maybe one of the strongest, so to say, enemies or criticists of university in Italy, and I really enjoy the fact that actually this problem of singularity is turning out to be about university and plurivocity, because basically it allows us also to clarify what the relationship between singularity and one is. So what is the problem?
Yes.
We're actually discussing about, say.
Yeah, and I think that issue about the problem of univocity would lead me again to introduce the possibility of equivocity, that being in fact is and is not, right? And that there is, good to see you again, you've been resurrected. Very good. We were discussing the theology of hope here, and I was, okay, very good. But yeah, just briefly, that there may be also this issue, that this question that we've been discussing about whether univocity doesn't also imply equivocity, and how you answer the question of the missing difference that would enable singularity to be. Because for me, it's like the possibility of singularity, that singularity is made possible by the principle of difference, and that if that principle of difference is not located, then we can't really, singularity seems impossible, even though it obviously is. And I'm not ready to go with Della Rocca or anyone who would say it's illusory merely. That doesn't seem, that's not, I don't think that's true. But then this question, yes, how can, the singular is, but how can it be? That's my real obsession. But back to our speaker, yeah, you had finished by saying, you were, very nice point, that the substance is infinite, so it must be infinitely expressed. So this is very nice. Please continue, now that you're back.
No, so no, it's funny that I started talking with problem of nicht, of nothing, and the Hegelian's problems, and the Gestalt react in this way. So I'm so sorry for what happened. So the point is, from the point of view of the Scotus, you have the problem of distinction. If it's not from an ontological point of view, you have the problem from an epistemological point of view. Yes. So maybe this is maybe a discourse a bit more general, but you can demonstrate that the particular does not exist as a different value from on your ontological articulation system and so on. But every day you have to conflict, you have to behavior with this problem there. Yeah. So I think that the ontological problems are linked with political and ethical problems and so on. Yeah. So that's the first point. From the point of view of Scotus, I say that the being is the being of difference of self. So the Scotists are known for the subtilitas, that is the thin skills to criticize the oppositions from some very thin differences. So it's something is something. The difference is something that you have to consider every time you want to think the problems of one and many. From the Spinoza point of view, I said before that you have the problem of we have the position of infinite of elements. If you want to think the ontology beyond the classification of Etienne-Gilson, that everything is being, in any case, you cannot, or you can all refuse the differentiation of takes and accept the multiplicity of reality. So that's I repeat, from the point of Deleuze, the reading of Scotus is to say that ontology is just one proposition. The being is, that's it. You can just write this word, this proposition in all the ontological books you want to write. Yeah. If you have other problems, maybe they are not ontological problems, because you have the problem of classification, of subsumption, of transcendence, and so on. So I think that according to the rhetorical strategy by Spinoza to take some words, some terms, and change the meaning of them, let's do the same with the theology and then with the ontology itself. Something that I didn't say, why Scotus is not a pantheist or an atheist. There is the risk of pantheism in Scotus. If you read Gilson, there is this element. There's just one sentence that says that Scotus is not atheist. It is the Exodus 3:14. It's the same number of pi Greek. That's why I remember it. When God in the desert say, "I am what it is." So for Revelation, Scotus, they say, "Okay, God exists." But otherwise, it's just an ontological problem, and the problem of ontology is reduced at this point. Well, that's the idea. The same problem. I thought the same. I tried to resolve the same problem by Schelling, for example. From this is very close to this tradition. And the young Schelling uses this concept that is Vollkommenheit, that is the perfect, a particular exception of perfection. That is the completeness of all the possibility. We can translate it as exaltedness. Is the being that is exalted in all the épuisé. He lost all the potentiality because everything is actuated. Happened the passage from the potentiality to the act. And so there is this concept say that is better this world with this that express itself that one that does not express. Otherwise is the metaphysical problem. Why the being doesn't do nothing? Is there? That's it. Maybe it's an anthropological problem. We are here and we don't know why. But I try to give some answer by the authors that I know. I know better. So Cecile.
So
that's
sorry. Sorry, Greg. I didn't hear you. Is all fine?
Yeah. No, it's fine. We have another question I see here in the chat.
Yes, we have a written question by Cecile and a question by Gaetano. First of all, many thanks to Elena Girelli from the University of Bologna, who probably saved us. So lending her laptop for the continuation of this debate. So thank you, Elena, wherever you are. And so please, I believe you can maybe start by answering Cecile's question. So I read it. Do you happen to know why the question concerning individuation was condemned by the Bishop Tempier?
No, I don't.
That was simple. So perfect.
I don't know.
But maybe you can. Well, it's 1277, I believe. Yeah, maybe we will keep it in mind as a question. So thank you, Cecile. It will be useful, by the way. And Gaetano, please, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone, and ciao to the many Italians that are in this seminar. Okay, I have a question about this relation between univocity and analogy. As Alessandro said, I am an enemy of univocity and a defensor of analogy. And so my question is that if I have right understood, you put in relation Simondon with Scotus and of course Deleuze. But I have many doubts that Simondon is a philosopher of univocity. It is very clear to me that Simondon is a philosopher of analogy, and this is clear in individuation. He says always that transduction is an analogical concept, and his adversaries are Spinoza and Leibniz. the philosopher of the one, of univocity, the substance, and the monads, which are instead the main references of Deleuze. And so my question is, Simondon is a philosopher of analogy, and I cannot understand the use that Deleuze makes of Simondon. So there is a very important difference between univocity and analogy, since the scheme of univocity is just what you said about genus and species, because this is the scheme of the relation Caten, as said Aristotle, and of synonymy, just in the case of Frege's example of Venus, the planet Venus, and the different ways we can denotate this same object. This is the question of synonymy. But in analogy, we don't have a common denominator, so to say, in mathematical terms, because I think that univocity can be understood as a relation between multiple factors of something. There is a common measure, and we have a multiplication of this measure, a composition, as you said. No? In the case of univocity, we have a sort of mereology in which we have atoms, no? And these atoms compose themselves like in the atomism, which is Democritus, Lucrece is a reference of Deleuze. And so we can understand this point. No? Everything is made from the same thing, atoms, so to say. But in the case of analogy, we don't have this relation. In the case of analogy, analogy means proportion. And in proportion, like for instance, 1 to x equal x to 2, x is not a common measure of 1 and 2, it's a middle term. And so this is another way to understand the relation between things. There are media, there are common terms, there are increases, proportional increases and differences from one to another, but there are no common measure. There is no koinon in this sense. So I think that the Wittgenstein concept of family similarities is just a right way to understand the analogical relation. So in short, I am an enemy of univocity just because, in my opinion, univocity cancels the differences. And so I cannot understand why the philosopher of difference, Deleuze, is a philosopher of univocity. This is incredible. This is impossible to understand, in my opinion. Instead, a real philosopher of difference is Heidegger, is, for instance, Simondon, but Simondon is not the philosopher of univocity. So what do you think about that? So this is my question.
Thanks, Professor Corazzi. There is a request of explanation.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, Francesco. Maybe in order to enrich the discussion, Cecilia has a question for Gaetano, actually. So, Gaetano, could you briefly say what constitutes the core principles of analogy in your view, especially, I guess, in comparison to Thomas Aquinas? So, whether your theory of analogy, Cecile, correct me if I'm wrong, but
yes, that's it.
See, the idea is analogy.
Gaetano, I just wanted to salute my colleague from the
Ciao, Cecilia. So the question is that analogy is a proportion. So this is something to put in relation things through a middle term and not through a common measure. This is the real question. And so this is the chain of being, in the sense that there are connections, copulae, we can say, between beings, and not a unique substance that is a quantitative common to everything. No, in the sense, in a numerical way, for instance, we can have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The common measure is 1. No, it's the number 1, which is the common factor of every number. But in proportion, we have another way to find the connection between the numbers through the middle term. So for me, this is very important because Alessandro knows my studies about incommensurability, because the theory of analogy arises in ancient Greece just in consequence of the discovery of incommensurability. That is just in consequence of the collapse of the idea that there is a common measure of everything. And so proportion is just the way to overcome these difficulties, no? Because not everything is commensurable to everything. There is no common measure. There are no atoms. This is very important because the theory of analogy is anti-atomistic because it implies the theory of continuity, but continuity is not the substance relation, because substantiality is the idea that everything belongs to the same thing, but continuity is like in time, one now is a connection with another now, but there is no common measure. There are links in time, and this is the idea of continuity, the continuity between father and sons. I mentioned Wittgensteinian relation as family similarities. This is a very, but there is no common measure between me and my father. There are relations, no, in this sense, analog identities and differences, but not common measure. This is the idea. So this is why I am a defense of analogy at the very end. Okay.
I believe we have plenty of elements now, Francesco. Yeah.
So thanks, Professor Chiurazzi, because it's very useful. It's very useful what you say to put an accent of some elements. Firstly, the one is not an element of university. That's the point. There is this ambiguity between analogy and ontology. If you say that everything is proportion, what's the being? How is the being of the proportion is univocal? If you say that something can be thought through proportion, that's the univocal of being of proportion. It's a funny game between two teams. In Italy, when you say about one, there is something that thinks the one is not the university. I know that we have some common reference in Italy, for example, Rocco Ronchi, that say everything that is one. No, university is not that idea. That's the henology. Even if you say that is university, no, is that the? So I agree with you. I am against that position. I think that on Simondon and Leibniz is the same as Simondon and Spinoza. Simondon wrote what he said on Leibniz on the Breillet, on that books, the books of Leibniz or Marcel Gerould comes after, even the books of Michel Serres on the mathematics on Leibniz. So the problem of one as that problem that is not the problem of university. About the analogy, there are two ways of thinking, or maybe there are lots of ways to think analogy. One is the analogy of proportion. The other one is the analogy of distribution. So I think that the ontology of analogy uses as a common element that is an hypostasis. That's the risk of the ontology of Thomists. There's something that goes beyond the possibility of composition of the things. So it's a kind of theology of dogmatical theology that comes out from this position. There is a historical reason why Deleuze wrote against analogy. The point is how Jean Gilson wrote a book on Scotus, saying that this book is very useful because it contributes to the history and theology and doctrine of the church, even if Thomas is the greatest one. just because he think the proportion, he think that the analogy is the univocal elements that can take everything together. So there are some rhetorical using of the analogy by Jean-Jusson against which Deleuze want to go. That's why he has to say that the university is the only ontology possibility. There is this only possibility. If you want to talk about analogy, maybe you can start with one kind of analogy, then to move against the other. It's a problem of history of philosophy. I think it's very useful just to distinguish and to avoid useless discussion. It's from one point terminological problems, and from the other are historical. I think that beyond the terminology, we are moving on the same in the same field. Surely there will be some differences or some problems, but I think there is principally a problem of definition of analogy and is historical terminological. So, Professor Curazzi, you are against analogy, not with age, not the one.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, we will have more time to discuss about this. If I may, maybe Greg, you had something to say, right?
Alex, you go first.
Well, really simply, maybe something that would be interesting because at the beginning, when you presented, so to say, the paradoxes of analogy, you started citing the famous theory by Aristotle, that being cannot be a category, because if it were a category, it will be predicated of its differences, etc. There is another problem, so to say, with university, that is not really the problem of being as a category, but rather the problem of modality. So the idea that something that I find really interesting in Aristotle, which is maybe understated sometimes, is that possibility is not a category, is not a predicate, is not something that is said of things in the way it is said of, I don't know, in the way blackness is said of things. And so maybe I was wondering, and it's a question I ask you, whether a way of approaching these two theoretical alternatives could be the difference between the way the term modality is used in the Aristotelian tradition, so to say, and in another tradition. So the idea of modality as distinction between, I don't know, possible, necessary, contingent, etc., or the idea of modi as, so to say, determinations, ways of being of the attributes, for instance, in Spinoza's ethics. And I was maybe I had one commentary about your debate with Gaetano. I think maybe one way of expressing, and it's a problem I always had with Italian universists, so to say, but I guess it could be extended to everyone, is not that university doesn't allow you to think difference. My problem is that I'm not sure. I mean, it's really difficult starting from a univocal account of being to think relation and mediation. That's I mean, that's a debate I had with the scholars of Severino for years. So the problem is, if you just say that everything is in the same way and in the same so you mean this exactly the same when you say that anything is, then you find yourself with that obnoxious strategy of asking, yes, of course, you are saying that there is I don't know, a relationship between a thing and its attribute, but this relation, is it something or is it nothing? Yeah, this is the typical strategy of Severinians, so to say, and you end up not with a thing, an attribute, and the relationship between them. You end up with three things, basically. So you never manage to actually think mediation and relation as mediation and relation. You just end up thinking beings. So because that's precisely the problem. So the question maybe is, of course, it's a matter of strategies. So how do you, in this new language, in this different theoretical framework, solve the problem of having some sort of difference between different ways of being, so to say? I don't know whether it's clear what I meant.
For my point of view, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, please go on. Yeah.
Okay. No, so it's an interesting point. I think it's just another way to think to the question posed by Greg. So from a Deleuzian point of view, the infinite attributes of substance are virtual. Deleuze uses category from Bergson because it's more, I think it's useful to go beyond the dialectics between potentiality and actual in the Aristotelian way. So I think that's only when you have the problem of enunciation, problem of action, you can think in a modal way. Being is always modal in every time, and it's so that's a generical answer. More specific, the last text written by Deleuze just before, published after his death, is the virtual and the real. And he said that for his entire life, he just tried to think this problem, and he admits that he was never clear about this element. But I think it's a kind of dialectical. It's a way to think the Aristotelian category in a new way, even if Aristotle had said the same thing or not. I think that's the great enemy, an ancient enemy of the declared enemy of Deleuze is Aristotle, it's not Plato. There is the question of reversement, the go against Plato is another problem. But I think that's the main ontological problem you have. But the in this way, the way of thinking, the university of being, is just a way to think to being by modality, only by modalities. If there is a link by Aristotle, maybe it could be you have to take Aristotelian scholars. I cannot read Greek. I'm sorry, my limits. But
so I guess we have a final statement by Greg, and then we will adjourn. So go on, Greg.
I don't want to give the final statement. I want to give our speaker the final word.
Sorry, final question. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. No, sorry, my mistake.
Yeah, no, it's okay. It's okay. So yeah, thanks a lot. This has been a really rich discussion, and taking a lot of notes here. I wanted to make a couple comments about possible theories of univocity or univocity that may not be atomistic or substance oriented. Like I think about like the beginning of Hegel's logic, for example. You have like Sein, reines Sein, and this Sein, reines Sein is really, Sein is univocal, really. It's just Sein, right? There's no difference there at all. But it's not a substance. There's no atomism here, but it does undermine itself, which is key. And I think univocal views of being do undermine themselves. And I'm interested in this because I think that's more of a feature rather than a bug. And I want to connect this to a question about contradiction, because I haven't asked it yet, so I have to ask it every time we have a talk here. Going back to Alex's question, given the univocity of being, how are relations and mediation possible? This is, I think, another way of asking the same question: how is difference possible? Because Mediation always involves there's something mediating something else. Relations have relata. Differentiation is arguably another way of formulating another way of formulating the concern. One of the results might be that actually, if you have univocity, you can't have difference, like we heard from our scholar of analogy here. You lose all the difference, and so you even lose the difference between being and nothing. So I think, yeah, in fact, we are left with contradiction. Again, I think that's a feature, not a bug. I think appeals to analogy also end up in contradiction. So when you say being is like health, right? You say being is like health, as Aristotle or Aquinas say. And then you have, say, things and what belong to things, for example. There's all these different ways of saying being. How do you divide the class of things? What's the class from which the difference comes? Edward Halper has this wonderful little essay, Hegel and the Problem of the Missing Difference, where, as in Aristotelian, obviously very sympathetic to analogy, but he thinks there's a problem here. Where do you get the difference by which the class of things is differentiated? Only what is not a thing. And so you have, again, then the question is it really, can you avoid the contradiction with either analogy or univocity? And maybe then that's not even the essential question here. Maybe this contradiction is unavoidable. And I'm curious about this issue of contradiction, especially as it comes up in your distinction between the henology and the ontology, going back to Parmenides, yeah? Because when you go to the Parmenides, as we all know, maybe also thinking back to the lecture that was given a few months ago now, when you have the first hypothesis, nothing can be said of the hen, neither nor, neither a nor not a. And then with the second hypothesis, with being, the one that is, you say all the predicates. So you have the apophatic and the cataphatic, right? And so one could also then, and this is I'm getting to my question, with ontology, one could associate this with the cataphatic and the henology with the apophatic. And this is another layer to the historical setting and the historical presentation. And it also then links this question of the singular and its possibility with contradiction. So I am curious if Deleuze ever addresses this feature, say, out of Parmenides, this no predicate, neither nor, into absolute nothing, and then the both and of the second hypothesis about the one and being, where we have all the predicates, right? And then what it looks like is we have a kind of equivocity, which is arguably another possibility in the whole discourse here. So there's a question in there somewhere about henology and ontology and contradiction. I'd like to hear your thoughts on this with Deleuze, Scotus, and any of your own reflections here. Thanks a lot.
No, thanks, Greg. Well, I need another section for answer all the points you touched, but let's say something about it. So the problem of contradiction. Well, I'm not sure that Hegel thinks everything about contradiction. I have this problem with this terminology, because even if Hegel talks about Widerspruch, contradiction, sometimes he thinks about contrariety, he thinks about differences, he thinks so. I think that this concept creates a lot of confusion in the discussion. So that's the reason why Deleuze has to say that he's anti-Hegelian. Let's start from the reine Sein, or the nicht reiner Nicht, at the beginning of Wissenschaft der Logik, the science of logic. I say that Deleuze read this book with the commentary by Jean Hippolyte, and he says, so you have two principles, A and B. Why the B has to reach the contradiction, as B has to become a not A, just to give the mobility and the dynamics to the system? Why don't we stop just to the conflict between two contrarieties? If you think the contrarieties, you can also think all the other relation between things. So I think that's the answer by Deleuze, and I think also in Hegel, if you want to think Hegel not by the thesis, antithesis, and synthesis Hegel, college Hegelian, but think Hegel in a more dynamics and more complex thinker, I think that we cannot reduce everything to the contradiction. That's why I have to say that the common, the difference between the uses of being in Hegel and the being in Deleuze are different just because they use two different, they attended two different literary genera. The Wissenschaft der Logik is a book, is a Tractatus, I don't know what genre is, that difference between the, is different to the others. So maybe the meaning is the same, but the sense is different. So I think we have to work on this topic more with more calm and more time. And that's it. The point is always the origin of the difference. So why you need something else to create something new. It's always the same problem. I think that's the metaphysical question thought in other terms, and I repeat the Deleuzian question. The being is univocal. Let's talk about something else. Let's talk about ethic. We talk about behavior. We talk about relations. If the problem are the relations, we'll talk about relations. Every relations are, so we have no ontological problems. Maybe some relations are uses contradiction, maybe, but it can also be just local contradiction in time and space. I think it's same in Hegel. Otherwise, you have an ontological split between being a nicht, between Sein and nicht, being a nothing. And in any case, you don't have movements. You just are in a part of being the nicht is nicht Sein, and the other problem of Heidegger and so on. So I think I am the most Hegelian guy I've seen, the one who goes to the Versöhnung today.
Thank you, by the way. Thank you.
Yeah. You're welcome.
For the Versöhnung, yeah.
But I have this. So what we want to do with our ontology, how can we use our philosophical books to say something against something? That's the reason why we are here, and we're studying something that my mother thinks is useless. But that's the point. I wrote a book on ontology to say that ontology is just that and useless. That's it. Let's go beyond.
Thank
I want
you.
to say something for the psychoanalysts, so otherwise they cannot say anything about me.
Thank you.
So this was the schizoanalytic element in the end, as tail of the seminar. No, really, also because you know it because you've been with us for the whole seminar. There is an ongoing discussion between me and Gregory whether Hegel was a universalist or a pluribusist of being. So this is maybe one of the great topics, and it will be interesting to keep talking about this also with Elena next week at the same time for October 4th. The title of a presentation, I have it here, is Hegel on the opposition between realism and nominalism, which keeps us a little bit in the courtyard, because it's again a modern author with a medieval problem, so to say. So we are in a way keeping true to this to the matter. And thank you, Francesco. This was really great. It was a great discussion. We are so happy to be, I'm so happy to be doing this, and I'm sure Greg is as well. Thank you all for your participation. And Greg, if you have anything to add, I leave you to it.
No, great. Thank you so much, Francesca, for the talk. Wonderful discussion. Thank you, all of you, for participating. And it's nice to be back and running the seminars again after the summer pause. So, all right. See you all
next week then.
Next week.
Bye.
Yeah. Bye. Thanks. Bye.